What is up, everyone? True Detective Season 4 has just begun, Episode 1 dropped, and the Winter Hill Warriors are here to break it all down. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been watching us since our True Detective Season 1 breakdown series, welcome back. We're going to split this video into two main parts. Part 1, we're going to talk about the murder case that gets introduced and how that case progresses. Then in Part 2, we'll discuss our main characters and some of the key elements of their personal lives. No time to waste. I got an ungodly amount of Adderall coursing through my veins. Let's get going. So the opening shot of the episode tells us it's December 17th, last sunset of the year before the long darkness. A hunter is teeing off getting ready to kill some caribou, but the entire pack just runs off a cliff. Very creepy, cool scene, but to be honest, the CGI was kind of ass, I'm not gonna lie.
It provides an ominous feeling. The caribou screech as the night descends was eerie as hell. The leap communicates they'd rather face death than whatever the long night is about to bring. Symbolism that something sinister has arrived, or maybe just returned. The opening quote of the season is pretty damn sinister in itself. It is from Hildred Castine, the narrator and protagonist in Robert Chambers' The King in Yellow, the supernatural fiction text with prevalent connections to, who would have thunk it, Carcosa. We remember it very well from Season 1. The long night is going to be a problem.
We then get introduced to the Tsalal Arctic Research Center, where 8 men have been living and working together. They come from very different backgrounds, but obviously they're all super educated. Old man over here is walking around in a bathrobe and socks. My Asian brethren over here is getting his cardio in. Very nice. The place looks pretty cool. We got a library and a large kitchen. Our Spanish friend is making cooking content. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is playing in the background with the iconic twist and shout scene going on. All of a sudden, things get pretty crazy when one of the researchers, Clark, is having a seizure-like episode and just says she's awake, and then all the power goes out. Holy fuck. I believe all this shit happens on December 17th as well, the same day as that mass caribou suicide event.
Odd living environment at the Research Institute. Similar to Season 1, we get a shot of where the crime is going down before we see the aftermath. It almost looked like Clark was possessed or something, and we mentioned this before. With the lab, surrounding weather, and mysterious horror, this feels like The Thing meets Prestige Mystery.
So a few days go by, it's now December 20th, and a delivery driver arrives at Tsalal with valuable supplies. Seems like a routine delivery trip, but the man discovers that the research center is empty. The lights in the facility are now flashing, and we get a blurry figure sprinting across the hall. Feels like a horror movie. That Ferris Bueller twist and shout loop is still playing. My man's is adequately spooked, and when he drops his keys and goes to pick them up, we see a cutout human tongue on the kitchen floor. Then boom, we cut to the intro scene where a Billie Eilish theme song is playing. So later on, Police Chief Liz Danvers pulls up with Deputy Hank Pryor to Tsalal to take a look at the scene. All the vehicles are still there. Twist and Shout is still playing, and that sends Danvers into a frenzy. She must hate that fucking song because she breaks the DVD player to stop it. A young member of the force, Pete, is already there to brief Danvers on what they know so far. The delivery driver, as mentioned before, called the police. The last contact the scientists had with the town was about a week ago. It's hard to contact the men's families because their backgrounds are from everywhere, but Danvers tells Pete to sack up and find out who is specifically funding Tsalal, since they'll have more detailed info on the men who've disappeared.
Whatever these dudes were researching and who they were working for is integral to whatever motive our perp might have had. As for the possibility of someone in the lab being involved, isolated building full of dudes, you're bound to get some tension or cabin fever. You can only rewatch Lord of the Rings so many times.
This week it's your turn.
I doubt you'd have anybody capable of taking out the whole crew and hiding the bodies. It would have to be something more complex. My guy over here was reading Blood Meridian, a wild ass read if you ever get a chance, and it's one that's got a heaping share of violence, and the scalping and profiting of Native American scalps is a key plot detail. Keep that in mind for later.
So what the fuck is a Tsalal? We learned that Tsalal Station has been operating for 18 years, researching Arctic geology and biology, plus the impacts on climate change. We get a background on the 8 men working there. We start with Ralph Emerson, same name as the famous poet, standard American white guy who studied geology. Then we got Anton Kotov, who's a Russian who studied geophysics. We got Li Jie, a Chinese geobiologist. Raymond Clark, who studied paleomicrobiology. His education suggests that he might be from Ireland. He's the guy who was having the seizure-like episode. Then we have Lucas Marins, who studied environmental chemistry, not sure where he's from. Then we have 2 biophysics men, Facundo Molina and Veer Mehta. Facundo was the dude making the sandwich from the earlier scene. Lastly, we have Anders Lund, the director and founder of the research program who studied structural biology. These guys live here all year long conducting research and digging up ice samples. Nobody knows much else. On the whiteboard, Danvers finds "We are all dead" written in all caps. A bit disconcerting if you ask me.
Since they aren't really doing experiments on anything and are more likely to have been collecting samples or reading data, maybe they just found themselves in a place they shouldn't have been. I love the conversation voiced over while they're on the hunt for clues. It reminds me of season 1.
To meet me tonight. Now if I can get him alone, we snatch him up and work him over. Maybe get to the do.
More on the missing men. Pete says that 6 cell phones have been found at the facility. Danvers then asks him to get cell records and the radio log. She wants to call in rescue and get choppers ready to start the search. Hank thinks she's jumping the gun. Maybe these science nerds just went for a stroll. Danvers breaks him down immediately. The mayonnaise from the uneaten sandwich has already gone runny, which means it's been at least a few days. The ham might look fresh, but that's because it's super processed. Right away we can tell Danvers is sharp. We also learn that Hank is Pete's dad, which is a pretty crazy work dynamic right there. The clothes in the washer are still wet and smell, so all these clues point to the men disappearing at least 48 hours ago. They take a look at the tongue on the ground, and Danvers can tell from the marks on the tongue that it belonged to a native Alaskan woman. Those marks only come from repeatedly licking the thread when fixing fishing nets. They send the tongue to get processed to see if the tongue was cut off from a dead person or an alive person.
Yeah, she basically picked it up like it was a piece of sushi. We can tell she's quick to the draw and she's got an attitude to back up the skills.
Call Central. Father's having a brain fart.
Hey.
Some shades of other detectives we've met in the past. We get the idea that Hank is not going to be super insightful as the case progresses.
And if these dorks turn out to be just out on some geek expedition, don't you want to hold off for a bit?
Though it is nice to see Kenny's brother from Eastbound and Down return, I'm a little worried by the lack of skill and resources around Danvers. She might have to do a carry job on this one.
When Danvers returns to the station, she finds Trooper Navarro waiting for her. There was a case 6 years prior involving a native woman missing a tongue. Navarro has found out about the tongue of Tsalal, and she knows that it's a native woman's tongue. She wants to get a look to see if it matches, but Danvers shuts her down. These two obviously have beef. The dead woman from 6 years ago is named Ann Masu Kotak. Danvers is a prideful woman, so she waits until Navarro leaves before telling Pete to go dig up those old case files. Navarro goes to meet with a man named Ryan who's working for the local silver mine called Silver Sky. Ryan is the brother of Ann. Navarro asks if Ann ever mentioned Tsalal, and Ryan says no. The siblings did have a disagreement regarding the presence of the mine. Ann was very outspoken against the mine, but Ryan disagreed. He believed that the mine provided jobs and helped pay the taxes that funded local schools. In her last year alive, they barely spoke to each other at all.
This was one of the more moving conversations in the episode for me.
Yes.
Mind if I ask why?
That line in particular brought me back to Rust and Marty in season 1, although a little darker, but it pairs well with the isolated setting. This place is legitimately based on the last frontier as we simple Americans know it, and it is the perfect mirror for the psychological impact this has on an individual. Speaking of the mine, maybe the lab was doing research for the mine on the low. That could have put them in harm's way with all this controversy. On a lighter note, we get another Lone Star appearance, the official beer of True Detective.
So the old case files on Ann happen to be at Deputy Hank Pryor's house, which is pretty fucking sketchy. Apparently he took those files home after a flood in the office. Hank acts like he doesn't know if the files are actually there, but Danvers obviously knows that's bullshit, so she sends Pete in to steal them for her. He pulls off the mission and gets the files to Danvers successfully. What actually happened to Ann? Her body was found on the edge of the villages, and Navarro, who at the time was still in APF, was the first officer on the scene. Ann was known as Annie K, and she was stabbed 32 times with a sharp, unidentified object that left star-shaped wounds. The murder weapon was never found, and her tongue was cut out. From the evidence pics, we see that Annie K had the spiral tattoo on her body as well, our first real connection with season 1.
The Black Stars.
Shut the fuck up.
It's not the first time we've seen this Carcosa-associated shape mentioned in the True Detective universe. Maybe it was a more intentional weapon, or it could have been some kind of lab equipment used for readings.
The tongue was never recovered until maybe now. Annie K was a midwife and huge activist, primarily protesting against the mine, so she had a ton of enemies. Navarro became obsessed with the case and started bugging people, especially people associated with the mine. She even showed up to this woman named Kate McKittrick's house. The reaction from Pete suggests that McKittrick must have some sort of power. Anyways, Navarro was even getting into fights with mine workers. So according to Danvers, Hank, Pete's dad, had to end up taking her off the case. Later on, Navarro says that Danvers is the one who asked her to transfer to state troopers. Anyways, when Danvers first came into town and started working with Navarro, Navarro asked Danvers to pick the case back up, and she refused. Danvers thought the case was a lost cause, so she simply didn't give a shit.
Yeah, there's got to be something weird going on, because why the hell would you have a guy like Hank with all of these files associated with a controversial case at his house? Like, you cannot trust this guy with classified info like this.
I'm not letting a still drunk DUI out just because sometimes she blows you.
Hey!
End of story.
He's definitely getting a paycheck somewhere. The spiral from earlier on Anne's body is a big deal. There are 3 possible ideas that pop into my head. 1, Annie got involved with some sort of trafficking ring. 2, Annie was given that tattoo in an effort to frame her as belonging to a trafficking ring, which would make it less likely for anyone to give a shit about her death or disappearance, because as we know, missing prostitutes and trafficked women are ignored by the law enforcement and society on a frequent basis. We saw this in Season 1, Season 2, and Season 3. This goes double for Indigenous women. Thirdly, there is a different connotation for the spiral among Indigenous tribes in Alaska, and it's nothing sinister, but is actually a reference to some type of belief or spirituality that is not encompassed by the beliefs of those sick fucks down at the Tuttle estate. It feels like there may have been some sort of cover-up or higher-up interference with Annie K, maybe the mine company, maybe something even worse.
So technically this Tsalal case shouldn't involve Navarro since she's a trooper, but she gets involved anyways because she thinks there's a connection with the murder of Annie K from 6 years prior. She's doing her own recon at Tsalal when Danvers walks in on her. Turns out that Navarro is probably right, and Danvers finds a key clue connecting Annie with one of the men at Tsalal, Raymond Clark. Clark has on this pink parka with a logo on the left sleeve. The old photos of Annie K also show her wearing that same pink parka, but her logo was ripped out. They search through Raymond's room but can't find the coat. So the men finally get found in a pretty wild manner. There's this woman named Rose Agano living by herself outside on the outskirts of town, and she sees the ghost of a man named Travis. She's pretty unfazed by seeing him, so it seems like this ghost visits her quite often. Travis does this dance routine and basically points to where the men have been frozen. Shout out to Rose for being absolutely fearless. Also, she's played by Fiona Shaw, who also played Aunt Petunia in Harry Potter. When the police finally pull up on the scene, we see the men frozen together in one big chunk of ice. They look terrified as hell.
This is reminiscent of Rust being able to tap into visions at random that guide him in the right direction, though I'm not sure how many hallucinogens Rose has done in her day. I hesitate to go the hallucination route because people are experiencing a lot of weird shit that's connected, so the odds of a common hallucination feel low, but I've been wrong before, and I'll probably be wrong again.
So now that we've covered the case progression, let's dive into some of our main characters. Let's start off with Evangeline Navarro. We can call her Agent Navarro or Trooper Navarro. We know that she's very passionate regarding violent crimes against women. We see this early on when she's called into the crab factory to settle a domestic dispute. One of the workers, Blair, has an abusive ex-boyfriend who pulled up to the factory to put his hands on her. An older woman had Blair's back and fucking whacked this dude with a metal pail, breaking his nose and knocking him clean out. Side note, Blair has been hit by this man before, but the black eye she's currently sporting is actually from the factory, which goes to show how dangerous that job is. At first, it seems like Navarro might arrest the older lady for assaulting the man, but when the man awakens and runs towards them, Navarro puts his ass in the dirt and arrests him instead. This is a big dude, but you get the feeling right away that Navarro could probably fuck him up in a 1v1 and that she's got serious hands. Later on in the episode, she walks by the same dude as he's talking about enacting revenge on the bitch who broke his nose. Navarro finds his pickup and dumps Bailey's in the gas tank. This woman is not to be trifled with.
We've had some detectives that could hold their own in a brawl, but she has the best hands of any of them so far. Despite the supernatural hints, I like that the issues in this season are still grounded in reality. Similar to the bleak economics of the Bayou South in Season 1 and the hopeless canvas the Midwest gave us in Season 3. We have a backdrop colored by poverty, the floundering trade of seasonal fishing, and some indigenous connections. Violence against women and indigenous peoples is sky high in Alaska compared to other regions of the country, and so is alcohol abuse. On top of that, Navarro is trying to right the wrongs of the past.
Yeah, we learned that Navarro has that military background, so she's seen some crazy ass shit in the past. She also has a sister named Julia who is struggling with mental health and is constantly seeing things. She also has a hookup who works at the bar. His name is Kavik, and Navarro straight up fucks him. She fucks the shit out of him, man. I'm surprised she didn't bend him over. You could tell Kavik likes her, but Navarro just treats him as a sex toy and uses him at her discretion. She even steals his toothbrush, which is completely unnecessary and very unhygienic. Oh, also Navarro's sister Julia, I think, works for Kavik at the bar.
She's a cold-blooded player. Got a little bit of that Marty in her. Her character has a quiet strength and is also quite stubborn. Seems like a loner who functions as a support for those around her, and maybe at times this pressure and bottling up of her own feelings manifests as impulsivity. Hey, nobody's perfect. Definitely did a quiet fist pump when she poured that Bailey's. You also can't blame her for wanting some justice for her community.
Evangeline is also very spiritual and in tune with that side. She admits to believing in God, and Danvers gives her tons of shit about her spirit animals guiding her and shit like that.
Spirit animal came to you in a dream?
There's this one scene where Navarro is driving and sees a polar bear in the street with one eye cut out. We don't know whether this is a vision or whether it's real. And look, just because it's a vision doesn't mean it's not real. So now let's get into Chief Danvers. Clearly this lady is great at her job, but also ruthless. We see this when that drunk dumbass Stacy Chalmers crashes into a pole, and Danvers handles her with zero remorse. In fairness, Stacy deserves it and should probably be in actual jail. Danvers has a stepdaughter named Leah. We don't know how old she is yet. We first see Leah when Danvers has to reprimand her for filming a sex scene with another girl. It seems like Danvers had a biological son named Holden who is now dead, and we see this scene at night where Holden calls out for mommy. Very supernatural elements in this season, more so than ever before. A stuffed polar bear with one eye looks to have been Holden's toy and holds a lot of significance. Both our main detectives have some sort of experience with this one-eyed polar bear.
2 of the 4 characters who hear "she's awake" are greeted by dead loved ones while it happens. There's got to be some link to indigenous spiritual beliefs in the long night. As a detective, she's got a short fuse, is a demanding boss, and has her own way of getting buried in a case. She acts like a regular scrub at times though, which is just an act. Like the kid who claims they didn't study for the test, but you can see the bags under their eyes from staying up till 3 a.m. looking over the study guide. Navarro and Danvers have a clear beef, but we can tell they do fuck with each other to an extent deep down. The chemistry is a little stiff at certain points, but that could also be by design and because it's only a 6-episode season. I'm gonna wait for this to develop before passing any judgment. There's a lot of potential here. Both of our detectives use their outside demeanor as a defense mechanism.
So let's talk quickly about Danvers' stepdaughter, Leah. She seems like a typical teen. Well, we actually don't know what her age is, but I'm assuming she's a teen, maybe. From one of Leah's conversations with Danvers, it's hinted that her dad was killed in a drunk driving accident.
About people driving drunk. You know, it's really stupid that we never talk about that day.
Danvers clearly cares about Leah, but the way she shows it is pretty harsh.
Would it be a season in True Detective if we didn't have a lead detective with severe parenting issues? It seems like she uses this rough outer layer to protect herself in vulnerable situations. This probably connects to the fact that she lost her own biological child in the past.
Now let's move on to Deputy Hank Pryor. This man is a dickhead and doesn't really seem to give 2 fucks about police work. He's not quite as sharp as Danvers, and we see this when he looks at the uneaten sandwich and incorrectly assumes that the researchers weren't missing for long. He's not super involved in Pete's life and is currently planning on marrying a woman from Vladivostok who he's never met in person before. He's similar to Danvers and Navarro in the sense that he's also a brute.
This girlfriend stays in.
Sorry, Stace. You heard the man.
But what other sinister motives does this man have? He took the Annie K file, so he's gotta know something. Let's also talk about Hank's son, Pete. Pete's a pretty young officer, and we can tell he doesn't have the best relationship with his dad. If anything, he seems to respect Danvers more. Interesting how he's down to stay at Danvers' spot to eat, but isn't interested in grabbing a bite with his dad. Pete has a young boy named Darwin, and he lives with his wife Kayla. Kayla is a native Alaskan, so the mixed race household, especially with Pete being a cop, will make for some interesting storylines. Pete seems like a good young cop who looks up to Danvers and genuinely wants to do good work. Even in the middle of getting a handy from Kayla, he takes Danvers' call and goes to get the case files. Also, Kayla, you can't be giving your man a hand job while young Darwin is right there. Come on, man.
Absolutely questionable parenting decision. You're right, Chen. The father-son dynamic grew on me a little as the episode went on. Peter's out here looking like a lost Skarsgård cousin, but is capable of some good police work. Hank, you know. I like the indigenous folk story aspect of this. Wouldn't be shocked if a legend like this crosses over into having a big impact on our outcome by the season's end.
We gotta talk real quick about the dead man Travis. We know from season 1 that Russ's dad was named Travis and he was originally from Alaska, so this has gotta be the same guy, right?
Listen, if we can get the eccentric ghost of Travis Cole as a spiritual guide, count me in 10 times out of 10.
Also, this type of analysis you're only gonna get here. Shout out to Travis for packing some serious heat. Check that out, man. Decent bulge, even in sub-zero temp. Maybe that's why Rose is fine with his ghost pulling up constantly. Lastly, what did you think, Damon, about the intro theme song? A bit more upbeat than previous seasons. Felt like I was in a nightclub. The cuts are pretty fast-paced.
Not a big Billie Eilish guy, but it sends home the despair of the setting and feels edgy. I'll take it. This is not going to be season 1, it's its own thing. I'm looking forward to seeing how it grows and develops to tell its own story in the next 5 episodes.
Alright, well that does it for our recap of episode 1. We'll be back with episode 2 next week. Hell of a way to start the season. Thank you everyone for watching. Catch y'all later.